Good evening, podcast listeners. Welcome to another episode of the MeG Podcast. Another one where we have guests in addition to the usual team of Matt, Richard, Jeffrey Cook and myself. We have two esteemed guests on the line, Jamie Mayers and Philip Powell. So welcome aboard, guys.
Hello.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Now, they've been asked for a specific reason, which will become very clear about now when I tell you, because in this edition of the podcast, we're going to be looking at the Nikephorian Byzantine lists, both the Nikephorian and the later Nikephorian. And Jamie and Philip have recently run Nikephorian Byzantines, different versions of it at the Ice and Fire competition a couple of weeks ago. So hands-on practical experience from people who've used the lists. Obviously, Nikephorian is one of the popular army lists. It's and has been in other rule sets as well. But I think it's fair to say it's one that people sometimes find a bit tricky, getting a list they really like out of, and then getting it to work as they'd hoped on the table. So we'll get Jamie and Philip's views on that, plus there's no doubt words of wisdom or whatever passes for wisdom from the other three of us. I always suspect in these cases that Richard actually says the most sensible things. Me and Matt are just here for comedic value. Richard, of course, will be, as usual, providing us some potted history across the period. And in addition to the Nikephorian lists, we're going to bring you a small number of enemies of the Nikephorian Byzantines as well, just to provide a rounder picture, fit in with the history, and some thoughts on how the lists match up. So that's going to be the meat of the podcast. But before we dive into that, I just wanted to ask the members of the team about the newly released rules PDF. It's been out in the wild, available for purchase for a couple of weeks now. So I just wondered what people's views on it were, and maybe even using it at Ice and Fire. So I don't know, Matt, can we start with you? What are your experiences so far?
I have to say, a game changer is genuinely the way I look at it. The search function in the PDF, it's a godsend. It's brilliant. It's hyperlinks, search, perfect. Works off a tablet, works perfectly well on my phone, and perfectly readable. Yeah, I love it. You did a cracking job on that.
Okay, one is tempted to stop there for such high praise. So, Philip, have you used it? And how's your experience been?
Well, unfortunately, I did have it on my iPad, but my iPad ran out of charge while I was at Ice and Fire. So when I wanted to actually go and review it, I was unfortunate. My mistake not charging the night before. So
well, we can't blame the PDF for that.
Can't blame PDF. But when I was using it at home to kind of look up and check things, you're right. I was able to kind of put in the search and find what I wanted without having to leaf through pages upon pages trying to figure out which section it is in, which was a godsend. The main rule book is very well structured, but I must admit that sometimes I forget which section a rule is in.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. Jamie?
I think I'm pretty much along the same lines as everyone else, really. The hyperlinks are just incredibly useful, really. There's always the sort of grey area of where a rule might straddle a couple of different sections or might in your head, and just clicking on it and being taken to it is very useful. Though I'll probably still get the hard copy once print on demand is available, because I'm a bit of a Luddite.
Okay. Well, I mean, you've paid your money. You've got the option now. I must admit, I think it's really good. I think I have a slightly strange initial problem with it. Is that I'm so used to the rule book as it is, the compendium edition, and doing so much, called on to do so much umpiring. I can find things. I'm taking a little bit of time to adjust to where things are in the PDF. but as everybody said, it's got a search function, the the and hyperlinks, so that does make it easy. So, Richard, I mean, I presume you like your own product, but I think there's been some thumbs up along the way so far. I don't know if you've had any other feedback.
It's very nice, guys, and I'll give you all your money later. The thing that you haven't mentioned, which I actually find most useful, is the bookmarking. That all the section headings are actually bookmarked. So I find that's actually, for my own purposes, I find that very useful. But that's probably because I know the sections far too well. But anyway, that's the other feature which is I find useful anyway.
Okay, I must admit it's not one I've investigated yet, but one to do. Great. Okay, well that's a real thumbs up from this team. I hope, obviously, that other people who have purchased the PDF also think the same. I'd just like to remind people on that PDF that whilst the vast majority of what you need is in the rules PDF, there is a free PDF for, if you like, the background, some of the information on which contains information like the base sizes. So for especially newer players, please do remember to download the freebie as well, because there is useful information in there. Okay, enough of massaging Richard's ego. Although I think
more, please.
we will now give him a chance to make a fool of himself, but he never does, disappointingly, on the history section here. So, as we always say, without further ado, over to Richard for some history around the Nikephorian Byzantines.
Thank you, Nick. So today I'm going to cover the Byzantine Empire from 960 through to 1071. Now, if I was to do that in a huge amount of detail, we'd be still here next week. So this is going to be a fairly, I hope, rapid tour through Byzantine history. So in 960, the Byzantine Empire controlled an area that included southern and eastern Greece, most of modern Turkey, a bit of northern Syria, and bits of southern Italy. So it was not at its greatest extent by any means. To the south, it faced the Fatimid Caliphate. Then to the east, you had the Arabs, the Abuids, and the Armenian kingdom. To the north, you had the First Bulgarian Empire. And to the north in Italy, you had the Holy Roman Empire. So there were a lot of different opponents that the Byzantines were facing, which is probably true throughout most of their history, to be honest. They were stuck in the middle somewhat. So in 960, Nikephorus, who was later to become emperor, he was entrusted to lead an expedition to conquer the Muslim Emirate of Crete. This involved a 9-month siege that captured Chandax, I think that's how you pronounce it, and shortly after, the entire island fell into Byzantine hands. And this was quite crucial because this basically helped restore Byzantine control of the Aegean Sea, and actually helped stabilize the empire. Now, while this was happening, the Hamdanids, they were a Bedouin dynasty. So if you're looking for your army list, you're looking for the Bedouin dynasty. They took advantage to thinking that the main Byzantine forces were on Crete to invade Cappadocia, that's sort of central eastern Turkey. And they raided Cappadocia But the Byzantines got their own back, defeating the Emir at the Battle of Andrasos, 9th of November, 960. And that actually was quite a crucial turning point because it destroyed much of the offensive capability of the Hamdanids. The Byzantines then invaded Cilicia in 962 and actually sacked Aleppo, which was the sort of center of the Hamdanid kingdom, in December of that year. Meanwhile, in 962, the Byzantines actually also had to repel a major Magyar invasion. So the Magyars were a step tribe from the north, and the Byzantines believed that the Bulgarians deliberately sort of incited the Magyars and deliberately didn't block the raid. And this was to trigger a decades-long decline in Byzantine and Bulgarian relations. And that becomes important later on. At the time, the emperor was pretty weak, and various complicated events led to Nikephorius II, known as Phocas, Phokas, becoming the emperor in 963. He was to rule until 969, and during his time as emperor, the Byzantines captured Cyprus, increasing their naval control, and he did a lot of reforming particularly of the tax system, but unfortunately he also created many powerful enemies, and this actually led to him being killed and succeeded by John Tzimiskes. Is that how it's pronounced? I really don't know. Tzimiskes. So anyway, but during his time, the Byzantines also won a major naval battle at Messina against the Fatimids. Sorry, no, it's the other way around. The Fatimids won a major naval victory, and that basically meant any Byzantine hopes to conquer Sicily were foiled, and Byzantine Empire never really controlled much of Sicily again. The other major event, I think, of this period was probably in 969, when the Armenian rulers, in return for getting Byzantine lands and noble titles, actually ceded their kingdom to the Byzantine Empire. This seems quite a neat way of capturing territory. But of course, the trick then was to try and hold on to it. The next emperor was John, as I mentioned. He ruled for 7 years, from 969 to 976. This was a relatively short reign, but he did sort of strengthen the empire. At the time, the Byzantines were in conflict also with the Holy Roman Emperor, Otto the Great. And this was because they objected partly to his use of the title as Holy Roman Emperor, believing that only the Byzantines were the true successors of ancient Rome. However, in 972, they came to an agreement that Otto could use this title. In return, Otto married Theophanu, who was the niece of John. And this sort of calmed down the Frankish-Byzantine relations, basically. And while all this was going on, there was a Kievan Rus invasion of Thrace. And so the Byzantines had to drive the Rus out of Thrace as well. So all busy times. In 972, actually, John invaded the Abbasid Empire, marching into Upper Mesopotamia. However, this resulted ultimately in a Byzantine defeat at the Battle of Amid in 4th of July 973. However, not one to take a defeat sitting down, he then launched a second campaign, this time attacking Syria in 975. Syria at this time was very much under the influence of the Fatimids, and John was trying to weaken Fatimid influence in Syria. However, he wasn't to survive long. He died in 976, and he was actually succeeded by Basil II. He was to be known as the Bulgar Slayer for fairly obvious reasons, but he was actually to rule until 1025. He was actually the son of Romanus II, who had been actually emperor at the time of our history starting, but he was at the time only 3, so he had been overlooked while Nicephorus and John were the emperors. But his eventual reign was actually to be the longest reign of the Roman Empire since Augustus. So that was quite an achievement. During this time, he was very much an administrator. He succeeded in reducing the power of the great landowning families. He did the neat trick of actually filling the treasury while expanding the empire, which is quite a neat thing to do, really. Not many other emperors managed to achieve that.
Practically unique, I would think.
Yeah, they either spent money and expanded the empire, or they hoarded the money and the empire shrunk. That's a basic summary of all Byzantine history, I think. Although his early reign was really dominated by 2 civil wars against chaps known as Bardas Skleros and Bardas Phocos. These were generals who basically took against him and tried to usurp power. These were finally ended in 988, mainly by using one to defeat the other, which again showed a bit of smart thinking there. His most actually risky time was when he was actually ambushed by the Bulgars at the gates of Trajan, which is in the Balkans. And this was probably the most serious defeat of his reign, and actually barely escaped with his life. But he lived on. And in 989, the Byzantines were to form an alliance with the Kievan Rus. This was quite significant because their ruler, Vladimir, actually agreed to convert his people to Christianity in return for marrying Basil's younger sister, Anna. I think Anna is quite a common name in the Byzantine royal family. Anyway, as a result, it led to the first Rus warriors becoming a regular part of the Byzantine army, and I suppose ultimately resulted in the creation of the Varangian Guard. Another neat trick Basil did was in 992, he actually reduced the custom fees payable in Constantinople to the Venetians in return for them agreeing to transport troops to Italy in times of war. Now, one perhaps unintended effect of this was it actually increased the wealth of the farmers because their goods suddenly became cheaper to export. And spotting this, Basil actually then passed laws to protect the farmers and lower their taxes, which actually resulted in growth and therefore brought in more income. In 994, there was a Fatimid victory against the Byzantines and their Hamdanid allies. And this led to a direct intervention by Basil. He sort of surprised the Fatimids and they retired in the face of these Byzantine forces. A second invasion was launched by the Byzantines in 988, but this was ended by a 10-year truce agreed in 1001. Bizarrely, despite acknowledging Fatimid suzerainty, the rulers of Aleppo continued to pay tributes to the Byzantines. So that's sort of one of those really odd historical situations. So I acknowledge you rule me, but I'm going to continue to pay tribute to the other guy. Anyway, it seemed to work for them for a while. Meanwhile, while all this was going on, in 997, the Byzantines defeated a Bulgar army at the Battle of Spercheios. That's Spercheios, in case you were wondering from my pronunciation. Now, this was significant because it ended the Bulgar raids into the southern Balkans. And really, from that time onwards, the Byzantines launched a series of campaigns, and a methodical conquest of the Bulgarian cities then ensued. Ultimately, this led to the Battle of Kleidon, Kleidon, in 1014, which was a disastrous defeat for the Bulgarians. And by 1018, the Bulgarians submitted to Basil's rule. Very cleverly, he actually moved most of the Bulgarian aristocracy and gave them land in Asia Minor, thus leaving the remaining Bulgarians rather leaderless, and therefore more accepting of Byzantine rule. In 1015, there was a revolt against the succession in Georgia, and this led to the Georgians entering into an alliance with the Fatimid Empire. This wasn't really acceptable to Basil. In 1021, he actually launched an attack against the Georgians and their allies within Armenia. However, in 1022, the Armenians themselves came under pressure from the Seljuk Turks. And this is important because this is the first time the Seljuk Turks interfere in politics in this area. And so the Armenians actually surrendered to the Byzantines. And because of this, the Georgians actually sued for peace. So at the time of his death in 1025, Basil was actually planning an invasion to recapture Sicily. So as you can see, it was quite an eventful career that he had.
Busy man.
Sorry, Nick?
A busy man.
Indeed, busy times, I think it's probably fair to say. Now, during his reign as emperor, Basil had nominally got a co-emperor, which was Constantine VIII, which I think was his younger brother. Now, Constantine therefore became emperor at the death of Basil in 1025. But his reign was a bit of a disaster. And in the next 3 years, there was a significant collapse in sort of military power. And this wasn't actually improved when he was succeeded by Romanos III in 1028. He was another ineffective emperor and ended up dying, possibly being murdered in 1034. Now, during this time, Romanos III led an army against the Murdacids, who were now the Arab dynasty in charge of Aleppo. and got completely defeated and suffered a terrible rout. Apparently from this, the army sort of became a laughing stock. In 1034, Romanus III was actually succeeded by Michael IV. Now he was actually brother of John, who was actually a eunuch, who was one of the emperor's administrators, and he was apparently the Empress Zoe fell in love with him, and this is how he actually became emperor. Now, during this time, the empire agreed a 10-year truce with the Fatimids, which very much put the Fatimids on an upper hand in the whole Syrian arena. Now, rather optimistically, the Byzantines were still trying to increase their control in southern Italy, and in 1038 they actually invaded Sicily. Whilst this invasion was initially quite successful, the Byzantines actually fell out with their Lombard allies, and the Norman mercenaries abandoned the general, and who was recalled on suspicion of conspiracy, and the whole invasion of Sicily fell apart. Now, this is notable because this was the start of the increase of Norman power in Italy and Sicily, which was ultimately to lead to Norman control of the entire southern part of the Italian peninsula. Now, in 1041, there was a revolt by the Bulgarians, but the Byzantines defeated that at Ostrovo. And then from 1042, there was a new emperor, Constantine IX. He apparently ruled with the Empress Zoe until 1050, and then married the Empress's niece, I think it is, Theodoria, and she remained married to Constantine until 1055. So this whole period, the emperor's power was actually largely based on their marital ties, which was not particularly a great way of controlling the empire. However, the empire's borders actually did remain largely intact, although in 1046 the Byzantines actually directly faced the Seljuk Turks for the first time. Now, in 1053, because of tax problems, the Iberian army, which was the army defending the east, Iberia at this time refers to the kingdom that would be sort of the northern part of modern Georgia in the Caucasus, and unfortunately this sort of did significant harm to the empire's eastern defences, and more discontent was sort of spreading throughout the whole empire, not helped really by 1054, which is the Great Schism that takes place between the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholic churches. And the emperors had not been able to control all the disputes between the churches. So in 1055, Constantine dies, and this signifies the end of the Macedonian dynasty that existed, and the Michael VI is then crowned as emperor. And in fact, between this period of 1059 and 1081, there are actually 6 emperors who are the emperors of the Dukid dynasty. And this really, under this rule of the Dukids, the Byzantines are fighting a losing battle against the Seljuk Turks. The Normans take over much of Italy. The Hungarians occupy Belgrade, and the defeat at Manzikert in 1071 and the subsequent civil war is really the sort of final straw that weakens the empire. That really signifies the end of our Nikephorian Byzantine period, and it takes the emperors of the Khomeid dynasty to re-establish Byzantine power. So I hope I haven't confused everybody. There'll be a complete test later on, but that is, if you can get your head around it, a summary of the history of the Byzantines at this period.
Blimey. That's so just over a century, and they seem to have got about 3 centuries worth of action into it.
Yes,
I think this is why I find the Byzantines so fascinating, because there is so much turmoil, but they are still an empire to be seen and fought against.
Yeah, never a dull decade.
Yeah, and I mean, undoubtedly the Byzantines were masters of diplomacy, always trying sneaky tricks and playing off their opponents against each other, which also provides plenty of opportunity for interesting campaigns if you're motivated to try and run different campaigns.
Sure it is, though. Representing the politics could be challenging at times, and this I don't know about anybody else who, obviously Richard, you've looked into this history, Philip obviously there, especially this period. It's one of those periods where there seems to be a limited number of names amongst the key players. There are numerous Nikephoruses and so on and so forth, and Michaels, and you start going, which one is it? Who are you?
Yes, it certainly. Well, it's not only that, but also their opponents. The Arab dynasties keep changing name, which I find very confusing as well.
Okay. Anyway, that's been a great run through as ever, Richard. Thank you very much for that. I'm sure that was a fair amount of research went into, and a fair amount of effort compressing the history into a manageable chunk. So certainly some of the histories of Byzantium you can get are big, thick books.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to cover, and I'm sure I've got a little bit of that wrong somewhere, but I'll leave others to pick that to pieces.
Well, anyway, right. So let's, with the history behind us, or in front of us, let's go on to some army lists. Always a bit that podcast listeners like, I believe. I hope so, because we do it regularly enough. We shall start with a Nikephorian Byzantine army. Start with Jamie, one of our guests, who, as I mentioned earlier on, this is the army you ran at Ice and Fire, isn't it, Jamie?
Yeah, it is. I suppose it's supposed to be Basil II, so it's sort of key, or one of the sort of key Nikephorian era lists. It's sort of based off a list by that I think Lee Sanders ran at Badcon, but I tweaked it slightly just because Lee's a significantly better player, and I was expecting lots of Hull archers, as I thought Ice and Fire is everything that's not European. So, and then possibly everyone decided to not do that still.
Yeah. Okay. Do you just want to run us through what's in the list, and then
Yep,
I'm sure everybody will have a view.
So in terms of command. It's a competent professional army commander, 2 competent professional sub commanders, and 1 mediocre professional. A poor fortified camp, just because I thought I'd be facing lots of sort of very fast cavalry armies who might sort of flank me and then try and get my camp, or do something sneaky like that. In the actual events, they ended up just breaking the army rather than going for the camp, but there we are. Didn't take camp, so I suppose it worked. In terms of your units, that gives me a PBS of 7 and scouting of 3, which is not terrible, but maybe not amazing. In terms of units, first up is Tagmata, who are the elite charging lancer cavalry. So they are drilled loose, superior protected, charge only bow, charging lancers. I took them as melee expert, which made them very expensive, but you probably have to. And I had them in a 4, which is possibly a mistake, but them's the points. Next up, thematic cavalry. They are very much the same as the Tagmata, but they're average protected rather than superior. I didn't have them as melee expert, as you can't, and they're also a 4. Next up, Cataphractoi, everyone's favourite Byzantine unit, or I'd hope anyway. There probably are other options, but they're all wrong. Basically, these are the famous troop type from sort of Nikephoros Focus's time. Well, I suppose they keep getting reused in Byzantine history, but anyway, they're cavalry, drilled close, superior, armoured horse, fully armoured, charge only bow, short spear. They're dev chargers and they're melee experts. I put them as a 6, as I thought they'd probably be getting stuck in, and I needed them to be junky and withstand some battering. Makes them incredibly expensive, but then they are the elite troops. After that, second-rate thematic cavalry. Very similar to the thematic cavalry, but they don't get charge only bow. So otherwise, they're basically just form loose, average protected charging lancers. 4 of them. My idea was possibly to use them to try and flank or find some chinks and create some misery for the enemy, but that was somewhat of a mixed bag. Next up after that, I've got 3 units of the regrade scooter toy. So basically the front ranks are spearmen essentially, and the rear ranks are bowmen. But so to go through the front ranks, that's drilled flexible, average protected, experienced bow. They don't have a melee weapon as such, but they have a list special rule called spear protection, which is basically you're cancelling the charge claims of any enemy cavalry. Just double checking the facial expressions just to make sure I haven't got that horribly wrong.
No, that's correct.
correct.
Yeah. That's the spear protection characteristic.
Yeah. They also, the regrade scooter toy also have a useful list specific rule called shield, cover and shoot, which is basically what it says on the characteristic. You can use your shield cover and you can also shoot without any downgrade of your shooting. And as both the front ranks and the rear ranks are experienced bow, then you'll be usually shooting on white, depends really. But I also spent the extra points to give them all shield wall, which just in my head would probably make them a bit chunkier. I'm not sure if it actually helped them in the event, but that was the idea. So that's 3 units of those scooter toy. I took the Varangians, because again, you probably have to. Those were downgraded in the list. They're superior. I took them as basically their drill close infantry. Downgraded from superior in the list to just average protected. They get short spear, melee expert, shove and shield wall. Took an 8 of those. So it was a bit of a trade-off, but downgrading from superior made me able to get an 8 of them, which I just seemed a bit chunkier, really, a bit better to fight things out. You can also get the ROS, ROS, which is a very similar troop type to the Varangians, sort of same stock of people, but you can have them as a separate unit. in the Nikephorian list. So they are drill close infantry, average protected, short spear, melee expert, shove and shield wall, and a 6 of those. And in terms of light troops, I've got a unit of skirmishing javelin men. They're poor and protected, experienced javelin, combat shy, obviously. So, 6 of them. Slingers, poor and protected, experienced sling, combat shy, 9 of those. And some horse archers, average and protected, experienced bow, combat shy, Cantabrian, 6 of those. With the idea that possibly the skirmishing javelin men and the slingers can either go in front of the charging lancers and just provide them a bit more robustness in the face of any shooting they might be catching, or go in front of the Ros and the Varangians, as they just seem like they're a bit of a draw for missile fire, as they don't get shield cover, so they might get shot away. So that was the idea, really. I think everyone was, in terms of command structure, it wasn't going to be a floating army commander. I think Basil himself was going to be commanding a block, sort of left flank, right flank, and then sort of the mediocre trying to sort of provide some backup where he could. Sometimes I'd give him the cataphractoi, just because, you can concentrate command cards on the cataphractoi, and you can also chuck the general into the combat, and if he gets killed, well, it's only his unit that's possibly going to think about running away.
Okay, so thank you very much. So I suppose, your big hitting unit there's the cataphractoids you've just been mentioning, isn't it? Yeah. So one question is, how did that work out at the competition? Did they?
Yeah.
That's good. Did people kind of ignore it and go after the other easier targets?
I'm not getting any worse at using the list, but I'm not sure that's great praise. So I think I was about on average with how Ice and Fire went for me with Nikephorians last time. I think
what did you
the
find?
Cataphracts generally quite scary and quite good. When they actually got into combat, I think it's always make the most of your points, and if you have a big expensive fighter unit, just be aggressive and chuck it in. I mean, sometimes you can use them as sort of, the thing that's lurking in the background and scaring your opponent, but you're probably not getting your points worth if they're not getting killed, at least killing some stuff. The shooting was quite good against elephants, which I think I just got lucky against. But it was very good against Dave Gollop's Indians of some kind.
Yeah, Dave Parrish. Oh yes, Dave Gollop. Sorry, yes, he.
Yeah.
The rule is the more expensive the unit, the more likely they are to die to bowfire. Guaranteed. Yeah.
Is that your personal experience, Matt?
Oh yes. Both sides of that dice throwing as well.
So what's your view on this list?
I actually quite like it. I struggle with Byzantine lists because my instinct is always to go cavalry and ignore the infantry, which I kind of think is a mistake. But no, I quite like that one. I'm wondering if the Tagmata could actually be downgraded to average and get you a block of 6. I don't know if the points work for that, but I think I'd be more comfortable with that as a support unit for the cataphractoi. But yeah, the 2 thematic units are reserves or hole pluggers, or as Jamie said, they're a flank attack. I like the Varangians and the Ros. I do like those 2 units, even with them being average for the Varangians. No, they offer a real nice, not a rapid punch, but they're going to hit something and they're going to stand there. And the drill close is just lovely because it's, now you see me, now I'm going that way. All for green cards. I'm going to turn right and march off behind the scutatoi or whatever. But I'm quite taken with that. I might revise my thoughts on Nikephorian lists.
It strikes me as quite a difficult army to use, because I'm not quite sure. Is it a cavalry army with mobile infantry? I think you've got to combine all the bits together quite well. It just strikes me as I think I'd find it quite hard to use.
I think with the scouting, you could find yourself being out scouted or in terrain that's not going to be favourable for your infantry. Though you are drilled flexible, but the drilled close and the cavalry, they're going to get a bit waylaid, whereas your opponent tries to maneuver you around the scenery.
That actually wouldn't be my major worry. I think my worry is still you've got a lot of drilled foot there. You've got to make use of their maneuverability, because you're going to get out punched if you just line them up and go straight forward. And you've got to then work it with the cavalry around it as well. So,
competent general commanding them. You're going to get enough cards without the floating general. That's a risk, isn't it?
Yeah, you've only got 11 cards. So again, that's the challenge there. Are 11 cards enough to actually get you the maneuverability to get you where you can outmaneuver your opponent as well? But
yeah, I mean, you could bump the mediocre up to a competent by losing some of the skirmishes fairly easily. It is, you know, it's. I mean, as Jamie said, you know, he based this off an army of Lee Sanders's, and Lee's a very good player. In fact, I played him at BadCon and came off second best to his Nikephorian Byzantine last year. And yeah, he got the timing right. I think that's one of the keys as well, isn't it? It's when to, because you've got one big punchy unit and a couple of units that are a bit more snipey and have to go in at the right point. So getting that coordination could be tricky. Before we move to the next one, just as a last question for you, Jamie, do you think it was a reasonable choice in retrospect to take To Ice and Fire, given the theme, or and equally, would you use it in a different theme, say a more European theme of the period?
I think it was a reasonable theme in terms of Ice and Fire was anything that isn't European, and what we were hearing from the history segment was lots of sort of the history of the area wasn't particularly European. And I thought my thinking was I might go up against lots of shooty cavalry that might suffer against the scooter toy. They can shoot and also cover themselves. But yeah, I think European, it depends on the era, I suppose, because the sort of the harder charging, fully armored late Crusader stuff is probably going to make them suffer.
Yeah, I think that they're possibly a bit, you know, they were developed for a particular time and place, weren't they? Yeah. There's just one point I'd just like to make for the listeners as well. We'll mention it on the blog when we put these lists up, though, is that the Ice and Fire competition was still running using 2022 lists and points, and Jamie's list has got quite a lot of troops who've got shield wall in them, which will now be a little bit more expensive. So it would need tweaking for 2023. But we asked Jamie to bring his Ice and Fire list along, which he has done. So that, yes. And whilst we're on that, we'll now move on to Philip's list. Philip took a later Nikephorian Byzantine, so this is towards the end of the period Richard gave us the history for, and he went for a somewhat different approach. Over to you, Philip, to give us your army and the thinking behind it, and some idea of how it worked in practice.
Certainly. So I've used this later Nikephorian Byzantines, I think, probably 3 times now in different competitions, and it's done well. One one time. It got quite high up the list. Then I got absolutely trashed, and I've come kind of around mediocre in the middle. So it's got a checkered history, and it has very much changed over those 3 iterations. I think a lot of people know me for being a cavalry army player. I've taken so many different ones that have just been fully on cavalry. I think my latest summations is a great example. I go full cavalry. I just have a bit of affinity for it. And so with the Nikephorians, I've gone off really the same way to try and see, as the list allows you, enables you to take a cavalry. It might not be completely historically correct, as in how an army would gone to battlefield, but I kind of feel like it's the runaway force that's gone chasing after the enemy, leaving the infantry behind at the camp and saying, right, we're scavenging and foraging. Oh, there's an enemy. Let's have them.
A rationale we can all live with, I'm sure.
I suppose starting with the actual units, and then we'll come backwards, doing it slightly different from everyone else. So I've gone very fair. It is, as I say, all cavalry. It starts with 2 Tagmata cavalry. So they're the drilled loose, superior protected, charge only bow, charging lancers, melee expert, the whole hog. Let's have units of 6 of those. They are my main hitting force. Also supported by the Normans, which I've got 2 units of Normans, one of which is superior, charging lancers, devastating chargers, melee experts, and the other one being average. So those kind of 4 units normally hang around with each other, if possible. It's kind of a mix of drilled loose and formed loose, so that does hurt you with your movement or your maneuvering. But they are my hammer of the army. They're the ones that go charging off and try and hit the enemy units as soon as they can. And being in units of 6, having charging lancer, all good, melee expert from close combat, and 3 of them being superior. So hopefully you'll have the pips up on the dice to actually do some real damage. And if necessary, pull back and charge in again. And that's normally got the legendary sitting there, professional general. So they've got all the cards. So hopefully he's got the cards to get in there and cards to pull out and throw them back in again. The other 3 units are mainly there because you have to have them, because there's some minimums you need to have. The thematic cavalry, again, the average protected charging only bow and charging lancers. So 1 unit of those of 6. This time round, compared to previous tournaments, I've taken just the 1 second grade thematic, where they've only got the charging lancer, no charge only bow. Normally, in the past list, I've taken them as units, a couple of units of 4, and this time I dropped it and said I'll just take a unit of 6. Don't try and have too many small units. I always find them fragile. It's always led to me having difficulty staying alive as everyone goes after the small units and ignores my big units. So I thought, well, let's make it a 6 of them so that they got some chance of staying around a bit longer. The final unit, the Cataphractoi, gotta have them. Unfortunately, I've started to run out of points by now. So you've still got the superior horse, armored horse, fully armored, charge only bow, short spear, devastating charge, melee expert, the whole caboodle, but only 4 of them because I can't afford to have 6 of them. It's something I'm thinking about in my next time I take it out to fight to actually bump it up to 6 because they did get picked on. Being only 4, after a few hits that have caused damage and suddenly break, it's another unit lost. But that's the other reason why it's all cavalry, so I don't have to have a camp. So no camp option. If I have to have a camp and I'm defending, I don't really want to be. It actually turned out at the weekend that even when I lost the dice roll, my opponent always was the defender. So I always went in as the attacker and had a no camp. So not ever giving away that poor camp that someone can go chase after and try and break my army much quicker. So still, it ends up at a break point of 4. So it is tenuous, and I must admit on two of my games, I won with only 1 unit spare. They got 6 points out of me with 3 tugs destroyed. So they were trying to hunt down the last one, but couldn't do it. And then another game against the Mongols. It was a fight off to see who could break the next unit first. So unfortunately, I lost out on that one. So being 4 tugs, to break, you really do have to think hard about when you go in, when you pull back, when do you do the healing of units. There's only so many cards, but you need to make sure you're still not broken. The lead in the army, unfortunately, with the points that's been spent on all those lovely cavalry, I have a chance of going with legendaries. So that's a legendary professional leading the army, followed up with a talented professional sub-general. And that's it. Just 2 generals. Not sure that's something anyone else ever does, but I thought, well, I can't afford any more generals unless I want to downgrade some of those units. And I really didn't want to. I thought with 9 cards across 7 units, let's see how the cards play. Can I control them? Can I have enough to manage them? And that gave me a PBS of 9, which I want to have, so I can roll that red dice, have the right cards, make sure I get the correct scenery, get it as open as possible. And scouting a 4, that's fair. It means that I've got a chance of getting some cards to try and out scout. As it was, turned out 3 out of 4 games I got out scouted. So, but only by 20%. So it kind of limited how much I had to put down on the table, so I could keep my plan a little secret until I've seen somewhere where their armies have appeared. But yeah, I don't think it's an army that most people would want to go with. Myself, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I had 2 triumphs, a near win against the Mongols, and a miserable defeat against the Ming. Not the Ming, the Qin. And that's the game where the cards did not appear for the 2 generals. They managed to get blacks and whites and a couple of coloured cards. And I was not really going anywhere. And I think Pete Entwistle realised I didn't have the cards, so he charged forwards with all of his big block units of polearm and crossbows to try and cut down the battlefield so I couldn't escape. And yeah, enough said.
Enough said. So, but it sounds like in 3 out of your 4 games, your 9 cards was enough.
It was, yes, it definitely was. On the first 2 games, I had cards to spare. I was at the end of the round thinking, I haven't spent this card. I don't need to heal anything. Right, I'm going to keep hold of that red and that yellow for next turn.
Great stuff. Okay, well, yeah, this definitely an unusual army choice in terms of structure, which I suppose means we have to ask our resident insane army composer, Matt, who I suspect is just nodding and smiling and going, "That's good. That's really good."
I've already copied it. I'm unabashedly a fan. Sorry, Philip. I mean, you've won me over with that one, mate. It's brilliant. Absolutely love it. The legendary and the talented general's just genius. Genius from my point of view, I guess, is probably the better way to look at it. No, yeah. It's got all the ingredients for me. No camp, or fortified if you do it the other way. No more than 7 units, because anything more than 7 units, and I forget what I'm doing.
That's another good thing for it. Yes, I didn't have to think too much about, do I need cards for over there? I've just got these stuff in front of me, right?
And everything you put on the table, the enemy looks at and goes, "Do you know what? All of that is hard to kill."
Mm-hmm.
Okay, no, I love it. Yeah, there's nothing more I can say on that. It's genius.
I must admit, I had a couple of opponents go, "I thought this was a non-European game. Why have you got knights in your army?" Well, I'm going, "Well, they're not knights. They're not all fully armored."
Knights on tour.
Yeah, well, knights were allowed in some armies. It's not a night-free environment, ice and fire, but the idea is to have it's more eastern onwards. So yeah. Okay, so this gets the big thumbs up from Matt, which probably comes as no surprise to anybody. Richard, who I think of as more Mr. Sensible, but does have an eye for the unusual, and I always like his army compositions. They're always, I think, more elaborate, more innovative than mine, if not into the Matt Hayward category. So, Richard, your views on this one?
Yeah, I'm quite intrigued. The legendary and talented, you went for, you said, because of points, or because you could for 9 cards you could have had 3 competence and got 9 cards for a lot less points. So
could have done, but I do like throwing my legendary into close combat. Maybe not always a good idea, but that +2 just seems to help in the right situations.
Yes, one would hope so, certainly. And I suppose it does up your PBS.
Yes.
And possibly your scouting. So
rolling a red dice for taking the intercept, which I managed twice.
Yeah, that invading is probably quite critical for that list, isn't it? You want to control the terrain, and
you're linking it with the no camp option, so it's sort of gone all in evasion, isn't it?
Yeah, when we come to my Seljuk army later, we'll have to compare the two.
The cavalry off.
That's giving the game away, Nick.
I'm not sure it's possible to do a Seljuk army that's an infantry army. Even you can't manage that, Richard.
Maybe I should have tried then. Anyway,
so it's the one thing I say at the general. Instead of the talented subby, you could have had 2 mediocre. Gives you the same cards, gives you an extra card upgrade option, and probably frees you up a few points, but probably not enough to do much with the troops you've got there.
No, I did consider it. Yes, I am looking to take this army to the Toil later this year. And I'm still trying to figure out one thing to do that's going to be slightly different with it. That's going to be a very much more Europe-based tournament. So
it's got more Europe.
So it's got Eastern steps. So there are some.
But it will bring in the more chargy cavalry from Western Europe, won't it?
Yeah.
I would say if you're going to. Sorry, I was just going to say, Philip, if you're going to redesign the list, if you can get 2nd grade thematic combat shy in there, I think that's still valid for the Nikephorian list, isn't it? Combat shy, 2nd grade.
Oh, it's 2nd grade.
That would just be the perfect list. It would be just this really rubbish unit that is going to hit somebody in the flank at some point and just ruin their day. Oh yeah, I'm combat shy, but I'm just going to ride you out.
Yeah, the 2nd grade can be combat shy at a discount of 28 points a base. So
Yeah, that might buy you a few extras and drop that unit down to 4 maybe as genuinely a reserve.
Yes, you only save 50 points if you have a 2 mediocre over a talented professional sub-general. So not a huge saving there.
Yeah, but the list's already got 80 odd points unspent anyway. So if you start racking it up, you mentioned the cataphractoi in 4s were a bit vulnerable. The way it usually works with the points, if you drop them to average, you could probably have 6 for about the same points.
I was thinking that, yeah. So I think making them average won't make them any less effective, because you've still got short spear and devastating charger.
Yeah,
still melee expert in close combat.
Yeah.
So.
Especially as you're saying that the way you use this army, your actual hitting ones are your 2 Tagmata and your Normans.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, because there's 3 superiors in there. So almost slightly oddly for this army, your cataphractoi aren't your main punch unit.
Yeah, they're too slow.
From what you were saying?
Can't keep up with the rest of the army.
Yeah. So
Or you slow the rest of your army down to keep them in the front line.
Yeah. I can see, but they can be really chunky. I suppose flank guard, I suppose with an army this small, keeping the enemy off the flanks is really important.
That's what they did in 2 games. They sat there and said, "Oh, you're going to charge me?"
Yeah. So 6 would be even probably more intimidating, because I'm willing to bet half your opponents would forget their average and assume they're superior.
Oh, I won't remind them. Ooh.
Oh, you only have to declare it. I mean, obviously, if they asked you partway through the game, you would be a gentleman and tell them. But
And
you only
snigger.
have to. Yeah, sorry, Matt.
And snigger at the same time. No, they're average. Did you
Yes,
remember?
exactly. You know, it's. But yeah, no, you declare it when they go down. It's, you know, if I was playing it, it'd be up to me to remember that. So, all good fun. Jamie, we haven't. I wasn't ignoring you, because I was going to roll this into, because Jamie is providing us with an alternative later Nikephorian to compare and contrast with this, based more off your Ice and Fire, the one you've already covered. So I'll let you roll any comments you've got about Philip's army into your bit on your later Nikephorian.
Absolutely fine. Looking at Phil's list makes me anxious even looking at it, but we're very different players and he's a braver man than me. So,
So not one you'd go for.
I can see I've played Phil with a similar makeup to that before, and he's I think it's having practice with the army, I think, is really important. For any makeup of Nikephorian army, I think this has been said before, but you need to know how fast your troops can go, where they can get to, what moves you can do, where you're going to be hitting with those. All of the units are really quite fragile if they get caught out or something, and then you've sort of bugged your plan. So but I think I've fought Phil, and he I think
Rickon, I think you were the Macedonians, lots of
Sassanids,
and I was the
Sassanids at
late
Brickon,
Reformation. And I was very cheeky, and actually I was retreating my cavalry in the face of your army until I've drawn you so far out that your flanks got charged.
Yeah, and you were very efficiently using the cataphracts as a sort of very scary withdrawn flank, which was a good strategy. But it looks a good army. I wouldn't use it. I wouldn't want it used against me either. So I'm sort of stuck there.
Okay, so the sort of late Nikephorian you would use then, Jamie?
So the one I've gone for is sort of, again, the route of the sort of combined armed route. So some shooty scooter toy and some cavalry, and again, it's just having enough experience and practice with the army to actually make it all work together. Just to make this is supposed to be, in terms of theme, I suppose it's 1071, so it's the army that fell apart and ran away at Manzikert. So if it does all look horrible as a list, I can at least say, well, it was supposed to do that because this is historical. But in terms of command structure, it's basically the same as my previous early or just Nikephorian list. So it's a competent professional army commander, 2 competent professional sub-commanders, 1 mediocre professional sub-commander alongside that, a poor fortified camp, because again I'm worried about shooty horse archers or just fleet of foot cavalry sort of sweeping around and taking the camp. So that gives me a PBS of 7, scouting of 3, nothing amazing, not terrible. Again, it's not, there's alternate versions of that where maybe I've gone for a talented professional army commander, but it's the problem with Byzantines is they're all drilled fancy units, and you've professional generals, so you've got to prioritize the points. In terms of the actual units, so starting with the Tachmata, So they're cavalry drilled loose, superior protected, charge only bow, charging lancer. Unfortunately, points is so tight I couldn't make them melee expert, which I was very sad about, but that's a 6 of them. The Tagmata are one of the, you have to take them as Byzantines. You have a minimum, I think it's 4 bases in the army list. So I could be wrong on that. Second unit is the Themata, again, one of the, you have to take the Themata as well. So they're cavalry form loose, average protected, charge only bow, charging lancer. No other characteristics to them. Took them as a 6 as well. Themata second grade, I think you have to take these in the late Nikephorian list, potentially.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, you do. So it's a 4 of these. They're form loose, average protected. You don't get charge only bow with these. They're charging lancers. Norman mercenaries is 4th tug. So they're form loose, average protected, charging lancer, devastating charges, which is fairly nasty. Took them as a 6. So they'd be a fighty unit alongside the Themata and the Tagmata. Then after that, I've taken 4 units of the regrade scooter toy. So these are the ones that can shoot as well as having spear protection. Again, in I suppose in my mind and how I'm theming this army is it's the army that fought at Manzikert, so it's to be anti-horse archer if it can be. So the spear protection gives you, probably deters any cavalry from trying to get involved, probably in a sort of head-on charge, and shield cover and shoot makes them fairly nasty against horse archers, as you're also going to be outranging them as foot archers. So that's 4 units of them. And then obviously the Varangian Guard, because you have to, it just seems rude not to otherwise. In the list, they're exceptional in the list, but that was just not working point wise, so I've downgraded them to superior. They're drilled close, superior protected. They're long spear in this list, which is interesting. They get shield cover, shove. I've made them dismountable. In my head, that was possibly because they have to be with the army commander, led by the army commander. I think that's the rule, because basically essentially your army commander is probably the emperor at this point, and they are the emperor's guard. My idea was I'd use them almost as motorized infantry, so they'd be with the attacking cavalry punch, and maybe it would be quite unpleasant if they were going head on against enemy cavalry, because they'd be superior long spears versus cavalry. And even if you forget to dismount in time, then you're still only giving your enemy 1 claim, because you're dismountable infantry fighting mounted, which is awkward for them, but not maybe a deal breaker. It seemed like a good idea in my head. I've not taken this in anger, so it might actually go horribly wrong in practice, which it usually does. After the Varangian Guard, I've also got the Varangians and Ross. Sorry, that's a 6 of the Varangian Guard. The Varangians and Ross, pretty much the same as the Varangian Guard, so they're drilled close, average protected, short spear. They get shield wall, shove, and I've given them melee expert. It's a 6 of them. So because they're shield wall rather than the shield cover of the Varangian Guard, they might be a bit more susceptible to enemy missile fire. But the idea is the Varangian Guard and the Varangians Ross can basically go in between the units of scooter toy, so they reinforce them, and they just make them a bit less of a target, because the scooter toy, once pretty much anything that's fighty gets into them, they don't really have any factors, apart from obviously spear protection cancels some factors of enemy cavalry when they're charging in. They tend to die horribly. After that, there's some horse archers who are a tug of horse archers, form flexible, average unprotected, experienced bow, no other claims, just a 4 of those. Possibly in my head, these horse archers and the 4 of Themata second grade could possibly sit with the mediocre professional as either a reserve line or possibly some sort of reserve flank. Possibly, that's the idea. Then the final unit is just a sug of foot archers. They're poor, unprotected, experienced bow, combat shy, 6 of those. Probably they'd sit in front of the Varangians Ross, because they're a bit more vulnerable. to shooting, and at least they give something that can shoot back at horse archers as they come in and maybe try and have a go at the susceptible units. Yes, so themed after Manticore. If you think it's terrible, then that's just historical.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Richard.
Yes.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I see a theme in Jamie's armies. I have to say I prefer, I think, the later Nikephorian to the Nikephorian in terms of how I use armies. I can see that one being slightly easier to use for my style of play anyway. Yeah, I just see it as perhaps a more forgiving version of the earlier Nikephorian army, I suppose. Would be my thought, but maybe that's not how it plays. I'm not a great expert of using these this period Byzantine armies. So.
No problem, Matt.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if my mic was on then, so stunned silence, rabbit in the headlight, as it were. But no, I again, I don't know. I not from any negative, because I'm desperate to see that Varangian Guard dismantable work with the cavalry. I think that would just be so. I've toyed around with that for a while, and I've never seen anybody use it, so I'm fascinated by it, and I'd love to see it in action. Yeah, solid. I'd be more tempted to go to 9 units and put the Scutatoi into 8s. I just I find them vulnerable in 6s. I don't know. They just, you see, if I saw those on the table, I'd charge short spear cavalry into them, superior melee expert. I really would. In fact, I have done it with my early Russians to their glorious success, but shockingly. But 8s just make me much more happier. But each to their own, really. I like the cavalry. I think the second one drop to average is sensible for points. You've got the superior to give you the shame that melee expert can't get in there. But yeah, no. It's not one that I yeah. Sorry, go on, Karen.
No, I was going to just ask Philip to jump in. Obviously very different from the one you used, Philip.
Yeah, yes, I think I'd be worried that I wouldn't be able to command this army. I'm not sure I'd be advancing. I'd be kind of stalled, waiting for the clash of arms as my opponent came towards me. Yeah, it doesn't play to my kind of my style. I think that's the problem. Though, admittedly, I'm looking at a command on Byzantines the next period onwards, which you do have to have Scutori Tatoi in it. So if I do go that far, I'm going to have to learn how to use some infantry.
The horror. Yeah,
I
think
trying this army, I think I'd completely fluff it because I just wouldn't know what to do.
Yeah, I think I'd concur with you on the command on this one, and I think that command structure, 3 competence and a mediocre, probably works better. Is okay for a 9 tug army. I think the 11's pushing it. So take Matt's idea of combining, but putting the Scutatois in 8s, maybe drop the horse archers, which could get you points for melee expert. I think I'd like that Tagmata unit to have melee expert, and the Normans as well. Not sure you can get both, but yeah, I think it is what it is. It's a variant, and I think it fits the Manzikert theme.
I was really trying hard to make Andronicus Ducas, who's the guy who basically betrayed the emperor and ran off, some kind of internal ally who was mediocre professional, just so he'd turn up to be
Yeah, but with the yes, but I think with the troops you have to then have, it would utterly break the list.
Yes.
You did. Okay, Jamie, thank you very much for doing that extra list. I think it's just nice to have a contrast with Philip's really quite extreme in a way version, but one that definitely got a thumbs up. Okie dokie. So moving rapidly on to enemies of the Byzantines. Matt, could I persuade you?
Well, it's an early Hungarian. Of course, you can persuade me. No chance of me not waffling courageously on this one. Right, early Hungarian. Not a well-known enemy of the Byzantines, I have to admit. It wasn't one that I'd really thought about. I tend it passed me by in the histories. Okay, so it's early Hungarian out of the Steppes and Eastern European book. It has a massive terrain choice of plains. Provisional date for this was 1010, so it's Stephen the Great, or Saint Stephen if you prefer, or that sod that beat me up if you're his younger brother. But anyway, anyhow, right. So talented instinctive CNC and 3 competent instinctive subgenerals. That gives you a PBS of 7 and a scout, and the scouting comes out at 6. Not much to say on that. Right. So the list has not oddities, but it's split into. It has 2 lots of superior cavalry. One is the Hungarian nobles, which are formed loose, superior, protected, charging lancer, melee expert, block of 6. Then you have the gentry, which are ish the same, but instead of melee expert, they get unskilled bow, shoot, and charge. So they're also formed loose, superior, protected, charging lancer, block of 6. And then you have something called loosely defined as Saxon knights. Cavalry formed loose, average, protected, short spear, devastating charger, melee expert, block of 6 of those. And then you have the standard Hungarian horse archer, which is cavalry, formed flexible, average, unprotected, experienced bow, short spear. I have 3 blocks of those, and one of them has feigned flight, which I've never used, and I had the points. I thought, sod it, I'll put it in the army. So there you go.
I can say I don't think I've ever faced an army that had feigned flight.
Yeah, I know. I just, as I was thinking about Nikephorians, that was the reason it was put in. But anyway, there's one more block of horse archers, which are cavalry, formed flexible, but these are poor, unprotected, unskilled bow, short spear, block of 4. They're just to make the points up and give me 9 tugs, basically. And I think they might have just tipped me over on the scouting. And then we've got 2 Sakehi borderers, which are cavalry, formed, flexible, average, protected, experienced bow, short spear, 2 blocks of 6. So basically, it's a shooty army with a core of 3 combat troops. I forgot there's 2 sugs. How did I forget these? Of scouts, which are cavalry, skirmisher, average, unprotected, skilled bow, combat shy, 2 blocks of 6. So
how did you forget those?
Yeah, yes, I have. They were out scouting. I'd forgotten they were there. They're so quiet. They come and go. Anyway, so that gives you 4 green dice where you need them. But all bar the combat troops, the entire army is flexible. So I'm basically hoping to defend in a plain with nothing, and then I'm going to run around you and shoot you a lot. That's the basic combat plan.
Yeah.
Subtle, I know. The feigned flight one was actually going to go. Only problem in Nikephorians is, unless they've got the Normans, which are slightly harder to control, is basically take them up in skirmish formation with the feigned flight and sit in front of the cavalry and hope they go loopy. Problem is they're all shoot and charge from the Byzantine side, so they're probably not going to get to do it very often. They're going to die pretty quick. But, I actually hope that you shoot and charge, catch me, break me, and pursue, because being charging lancers, you can't stop them. So, you'd be forward, and then you're forcing to move your infantry up. That was the general thought of the idea. But it's my usual cavalry army, basically. You can put a different name up.
If you were going to do that, why didn't you give the feigned flight to the poor unit?
I was just thinking that myself.
Well, I kind of like to hope they might get away. to do it again. But yeah, you are right.
Oh, that's not the map we know.
Yeah, it's true. Yes, you could do that and save a few points, but
Yeah. So how would our Byzantine armies, Jamie and Philip, think about facing that?
I think I've learned my lessons against the Mongols, because what I ended up being against 9 tugs, and they outnumbered me on the board edge, out so you could get round behind me. What I think I'd do is my superiors tagmata would probably go into a single line of 6 to try and make the width bigger, keep the Normans nice and snug in 2 rows, and I'll just try and stretch out so he can't outflank me. And then just go charging Lancer straight forwards on that open back plains.
Yeah.
And see if your shooting can slow me down and kill enough of me. Those scouts would be a worry.
Yeah. To be honest, if I clocked Philip's army before we played, I'd be putting rough terrain down.
Oh, you would.
Because I can fight in rough, being flexible. I can sit there and shoot you all day long. So, but you being a legendary general, you're probably going to control it. So, swings and roundabouts. But yeah, made for a game.
Jamie, with the Nikephorians.
Yeah, with the more vanilla Nikephorians, I'd probably be trying to put down more terrain just to close down the width a bit. I think I'd be trying to lead with my shooty infantry, just to form, well, I suppose all of those scooter toy are just going to be forming a dead zone that you don't really want to be going into with cavalry. Or not the cavalry you have there, and then sort of trying to, I don't know, maybe use my cataphractoid to lead the cavalry in one condensed area. But it's the problem of charging lancers going loopy, and then suddenly they're all over the place, and so are the enemy horse archers, and it's all gone horribly wrong. But that's the usual thing. At least my camp won't be sacked, but that wasn't very much fun.
At least the camp's safe. Yeah. Richard, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah. It's, as I say, I think I agree with Jamie. I'd lead with the infantry, try and narrow it down. Yeah, don't really want to be on an open plain, really. Facing something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm
not sure what else to say, really.
Yeah, no, I think it is what it is. It's as Matt said, you run around, you shoot a lot, you hope. I'd take it on with my Seljuks. So. Yes, yeah. I mean, I think it's an okay army. It's got those 2 units of scouts are very useful because they can give you green dice shooting, or at least white S, counting as a wound. If you're shooting at superiors, it suffers one thing that I find all horse archer armies that are mainly experienced bow do, is you are susceptible to those games where your shooting just doesn't do enough. So Philip's idea of space out line out the superior tagmata and push forward to push you off the table. It could go horribly wrong, I have to say. All those white dice could cause big holes in the tagmata, but yeah, and I have to say, I think fighting your army, Jamie, with this one, it's at that point, when do I have a punt with the nobles, gentry, and Saxon knights at the Scutatoi?
Yeah, I was thinking the same.
Yeah, so I don't know, but maybe if I was using the Nikephorians, you've got your Varangians and Rus, and maybe cavalry interlevered with your Scutato, or gaps for them to come through. rather than just one big long line of scutatoi, just so that if those charging cavalry decide to have a punt, you can possibly get something that's more fighty in their way. Yeah, obviously that calls for a bit of advanced knowledge on the armies. Okie dokie. My turn now. My turn. This is, I brought a Bedouin Dynasty's army, the Hamdanids, that Richard mentioned in his intro with the historical bit. The Hamdanids based in Aleppo, which certainly prior to the period of the Nikephorians were a right pain in the backside for the Byzantines, but as Richard outlined, they under Nikephorus they got beaten basically as the Byzantine armies improved. So anyway, this is an army I have used, and I've used in previous rules as well. But anyway, the army structure is a competent professional army commander, 2 competent instinctive, and a talented instinctive subgenerals. Gone for the competent professional army commander because that gives bonuses in the PBS and the scouting over an instinctive one, although you're not getting the benefits of dice allocation or anything. I've normally dated the army at 964 for what it's worth. Poor unfortified camp. PBS came out at 8 and scouting of 4. So, which is possibly a shade disappointing for these sort of armies, but there's reasons for that. Anyway, there's 11 tugs. 4 of them are Bedouin cavalry who are form flexible, average unprotected long spear. I really like these troops, but other people I know do have trouble with them. Sometimes finding a use for them. I've got 2 6s and 2 4s in that. I've got a unit of Gilman, Mamluks if you like, cavalry drilled loose, superior protected, experienced bow short spear, unit of 6. A second unit of Gilman, but these have been regraded. These are cavalry formed close, superior armoured horse, fully armoured, melee expert, which is based off a historical reference. That they've been regraded from the bow type. You could have 2 units of the bow ones if you wanted. These sort of like quote, cataphract ones are just 1 point a base more expensive than the standard Mamluk types. I've got 2 tugs of armoured cavalry, formed loose, average protected long spear. Again, one of my favourite troop types. 2 units of Daylami mercenaries, infantry drilled flexible, average protected, devastating charger melee expert, both 8s. And an 8 of Ghazis, who are tribal loose, average unprotected, devastating charger, fleet of foot. So again, 8. 2 6 base units of sub-units of skirmishing archers, infantry skirmishers, average unprotected, experienced bow. This is more or less quite similar to the army I used at Toil last year, but I didn't have the cataphract Gilman. I had 2 units of the just the traditional experienced bow types. It's a bit of a bits and pieces army. Definitely, you know, it's the Bedouin cavalry. Whilst they can skirmish and scoot around a lot, they can't shoot like horse archers can. So, you know, they can be very useful for holding people up, but they don't have that projecting fire. Your fighting troops are going to be the Gilman, the armoured cavalry, and the Daylami. The Daylami obviously are great in terrain, and looking at the fighting Byzantines thing, they can be really good at fighting the scutatoi. They can cause the scutatoi real problems. The 2 units of our skirmishing archers are quite useful, sniping along. When I used them last year, I tended to attach 1 to each of the Gilman units, who tugged them along, which meant I had plenty of cards for doing other stuff. And just added another couple of files of shooting into that as well. Oddly, for what is more or less a cavalry army, because you've got the Daylami, it can benefit from terrain. Those Daylami are really good in terrain. There's not that many troops that are as good, although you can end up fighting other Daylami. The Ghazis, although tribal loose, I found very useful in support of other troops like the Dale Army. The fleet of foot obviously means they move faster, and you, because of that, could threaten to get on flanks. And if they don't really have a role in the game, they're only 368 points for an 8 base unit. So using them as filler is no bad thing. Or just something expendable to throw in with the dev charging. Hope they do something. If they don't, oh well. Maybe back to Matt's idea of something sacrificial, something pursues, you slam into the flank of the pursuing unit. So I think it's an army it's probably more comfortable against Jamie's Nikephorian than it would be against Philip's. I think Philip's is just so tough it could potentially bully this one. I'd definitely be looking for terrain to fight Philip's army, so that when I had to fight those tough units, it's in narrower areas, and hopefully, maybe I can work things onto the flanks. Anyway, that's that one. So thoughts, please, gentlemen.
I think that's a very Nick army and would be a dangerous opponent to a lot of my armies, basically.
I second that.
Ooh, maybe I'll take it to toil again. Although Philip's talked about taking his Nikephorians, and I'm not sure I want to face them with this, Ollie.
I have been caught out with those Bedouin cavalry doing an outflank, because they can come on flexible and come on quite quickly on a red.
It wasn't me. It wasn't me, honest.
And that is a reason for having the talented sub-general in this army. I could send all 4 of those units on a flank march and come on 1 red card, if the terrain suits.
You could see that I'm going to be down one flank, and you could come on behind me, and that caused so much pain.
Yeah.
Having said that, I did do it to Philip at the Visors last year against his Sarmatians with my Sassanids.
You did, yes. Yep. They came on behind us, and I just didn't know what to do about them. I tried to run away, not too successfully.
Yeah, and there's one thing about those Bedouin cavalry that I think can be useful, because they've got long spear. If they're fighting something that is, say, protected melee expert in the ongoing melee, you're actually on even factors as long as the Bedouin can be at least 2 deep, because the long spear cancels out the mounted melee expert, and that sometimes catches people out.
Yeah, long spear are good value, I think.
Yeah. So again, makes those armored cavalry in there really. They are, as I think we've discussed at previous podcasts, they're good all-rounders, not necessarily spectacular, but they can really hang around and cause problems.
Yeah, I really like those Bedouin cavalry. Actually, the Bedouin cavalry, the armored cavalry, and the Dale army, I really kind of wish I had them in my own army or Nikephorian army. Then just kind of.
Well, you don't actually have to take any Gilman in this army, so you could. Although I think you need another couple of fighter units, because I think that you can only have the 12 armored cavalry in the list.
Just the long spear cavalry are really good. They're not the sort of charging lancer where they go loopy and then pick a fight. They can't win. It's just.
Yeah, they're nice, controllable troops. For those of us who are a bit more want to have control over them, a little less free and easy. They're really good in my view. Yeah.
Not quite enough bows to be a Nick army, I'd have thought, or proper Nick army. But
thank you, Philip. How would you like to fight that with your Nikephorian? Considering I'm a bit nervous about it.
I would have a go. I would definitely.
I would expect nothing less of you, sir.
No holding back. I'll try and get in there. I think I will struggle. I will, because you're 6 tugs versus my 4. I think I might get a few good casualties, and then I'll just be outnumbered and slowly disappear.
I would expect, so even if I was to win, I would expect to lose 4 units at least, but hope to get on your flanks. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's it. The Bedouin cavalry, I just don't think I could actually hold them up getting around there, especially if I'm just going to be so thin on the line because of the size of my army. You're going to get around me somewhere, and if I don't try and hold up the Bedouin cavalry, then the Dalami mercenaries are going to come up. and wedge in there. And I'm not sure I could actually win a battle against 8 strong army.
You're talking me into taking it to toil. Anyway, in the interest of moving on, because we've one more list to go, which is, in my view, an important one. Richard, over to you. I have sort of told people what it is, but you can tell us the details.
Yes, so this is the Great Seljuk Empire, 1071. So 4 competent generals, a professional army commander, 2 professional competent subs, and a competent instinctive ally, Turkoman, internal ally. It has no camp, which gives you a clue that it doesn't have any infantry. It is 9 tugs, and that's it. We've got the Sultan's Guard, who are drilled loose, exceptional, protected, downgraded to unskilled bow, short spear. That's driven out of the points necessity of getting within the points limit. But if I was going to not worry about shooting with any of the units, I think it's going to be the Sultan's Guard. 2 units of 6 Mamluks, drilled loose, superior, protected, experienced bow, short spear. Same as Nick Skillman in his Bedouin army. Then 4 units of Turkoman tribesmen, 1 experienced, 3 skilled, all 6s, formed, flexible, average, unprotected cavalry. And then 2 allied Turkoman tribesmen units, 1 experienced, 1 skilled bow, average, unprotected, formed, flexible cavalry. So just as I say, 9 units in total. And the Sultan's personal guard must be in the army commander's command. But the army commander can still float as long as the Sultan's Guard are the only units that he directly commands and that he remains with that unit.
Interesting.
Yeah, which I think is what Jamie was alluding to, was his second Nikephorian with the Varangian Guard, wasn't it? Had to be in the army commanders. Yeah. Which has been sort of a new thing introduced into a few lists this year, isn't it?
It is indeed.
Yeah, because it's a goodie, yeah. Well, I'm going to jump in for once at the beginning and say, well, how am I going to criticise this army? It's Turkish with lots of horse archers. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 6s with skilled bow. I can see why you downgrade the Sultan's Guard to unskilled. I suppose if you wanted to keep them as experienced, you'd probably have to lose the no camp.
Yeah, exactly. Spot on.
Which I might consider doing, but in some ways, making the Sultan's Guard unskilled focuses it. That's a unit to punch at the right point. Yeah, I have no criticism of this list at all. I would happily field it, and will probably steal the list.
If I had the models, I would be interested, but I've got none of this Seljuk army in my collection. So, but yeah, I think I'd again struggle with all that shooting. It's just too much skilled bow for me to survive long enough. And with no camp to kill.
Yeah.
Though, well, if I was the attacker, invader, you'd end up having a camp. So there is a bonus there. But
It's a good point. You've got the legendary general. So yes, you probably have a good chance of being able to shoot. Yeah.
Red to green, yes, you've got a reasonable chance with that.
I see it going the same as I did against the Mongols. I'd get to the final unit to break your tug of 5, and I would fail because you get mine first. So I'd get 8 points. I think
think positive. It'll work next time.
Yes. But no,
Yes, if I'm forced to defend, I think the Sovereign's Guard is going to be the unit you've got to get through to get to the camp.
Unfortunately, I suspect he might have the tools to do that. I don't know, exceptional.
though, because the best I'm superior charging lancer.
Yeah.
Maybe with the Normans, the
superior Normans, perhaps, just hope to get a shatter early on. Yeah, Jamie.
Speaking as a potential opponent, I'm fairly terrified by that, by the amount of skilled shooters. It's also what I think I'd be trying to defend, where I could try and put down sort of either in mountains and put down rough, or maybe coastal and put down things like vineyards, where maybe at least I can sort of shoot out and you can't really go in without being slightly discomforted, but then you're flexible actually, so that's not, I don't know, probably do what they did in history, which is just chase you all day and then try and maneuver at the end and it all goes horribly wrong and they fall on them like ravenous wolves.
Is it me, or are Byzantine commanders not being too optimistic about this one?
They're certainly channeling their historical counterparts. I feel it's not going to end well, boss.
There's a shadow of Manzikert looms long.
Can we just skip to the diplomacy side and we'll just
hand over massive wadges of cash and ask you to leave nicely? Yeah.
Matt.
Yes. It is as your point. It is what it is. In general, I wouldn't want to fight it. I mean, I'm looking at it. Actually, I don't think the early Hungarians. It'd be an interesting game of chess, I think, because I've got 3 combat units and the Sakai, who are all reasonably happy with what's in that army. The problem, all the horse archers would probably have to flex into scouting from my side, but the Sakai probably wouldn't. And then I give Richard a bit of a quandary in that, he can't afford to get me too close because my protected Sakai shooting unprotected skilled is green. To be honest, I'm looking at this going, my biggest chance is to try and get my heavy stuff into his heavy stuff and then worry about the shooting afterwards. Yeah. Interesting. It'd be an interesting game, I think.
Yeah, it's one of those that could have vast amount of casualties very quickly.
Yeah.
The skilled and say if you can get your experienced up, some of them up close and personal, be a lot of green dice rolling. And I have long memories of a game against Richard, which where we did that. It was utterly brutal. I think that was a game where I rolled good shooting dice. Richard rolled even better, but we were just taking handfuls of horse archers off every move. Well, I say every move.
Each other, yes.
I think it was more like both of the moves we shot at each other, and then my army broke. So it can go that way. Okay, guys. Thank you for those lists. I'm just aware because we've done 6 lists, and Richard's history, we've covered quite a bit of ground, so we'll not do too much more. But one thing I did want to do was just because we had the Ice and Fire competition recently, is something Matt suggested, which I think could be good for our listeners, which is I've sort of titled "Rules What I Learned," or relearned perhaps, and just if anybody's got anything that cropped up rules-wise, just briefly for the listeners, just to pass on information. And as Matt suggested it, I'll throw it over to him first up.
There was one I noticed in the rules that cropped up, not in our game, but in another one. When you shoot at an enemy file, if the nearest base is not an eligible target, you cannot shoot at any base in that file. It actually says,
correct.
Yeah, which I have always played wrong. I've eliminated what I classed as ineligible targets and gone to the nearest eligible target, but it's not. The entire file is taken out of the shooting rack. So even if you have 4 deep, if the front one's in combat, you can't shoot at that file. So that was one.
Yeah, the significant thing is if you're on the flank of a unit, but not behind it, the nearest file, and the nearest file of that unit is in combat, then you won't be able to shoot at that unit in combat. And people do get that wrong sometimes.
Yeah.
But that's the main driver behind it. If you want to shoot at units in combat, you're going to have to get behind them, so
Yes,
that the nearest base is not the front base which is fighting.
But it also counts if the base behind that is contributing. That is also not
Indeed, that wouldn't be eligible, but the ones behind that would be.
Yeah. Unless they're pike, of course, and then that's a different story.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll throw in the one that cropped up in our game, which is about if you declare a charge and the target moves, and when you can then change the direction of your charge to follow things that have moved. And one thing I noticed, which I suspect I've played wrong, is that the rules say may alter the direction of charge if by doing so they can catch or attempting to catch any UG that has moved position due to a runaway, skirmish, intercept or counter charge. What it means is you can't change direction to follow a unit that has charged, which I think I have played before, which it's all about that who gets to move which units, the order you move your charges. Because I'm sure I have played it and obviously played it wrong, where if a unit that charge has moved, my charge can't follow that particular unit. And Richard is now looking
very puzzled.
Very puzzled at that one.
Yes, interesting.
Yes.
The rule is as it's written, so
absolutely.
I'm not sure I could tell you why we specifically wrote it that way when we did, but
and I don't believe that wording has changed. So yeah,
but how it came up in our game was Nick could quite easily have declared the charge with a wheel, so it was heading in the direction that my unit was about to charge out of. So he could still have had an eligible charge, but being the sod that I am, I went and put a unit of light horse directly in front of Nick's unit to stop him wheeling. So it meant that he could only get a very small wheel in, not enough to allow once I charged to still be in charge line. So in the end, Nick actually decided to chase my light horse, did basically a 90-degree turn, and then ended up causing more havoc than it was worth. So I shouldn't have bothered. But there we go.
I don't know. If you hadn't have done that, I could have declared the wheel enough to hit your unit in the rear.
Yeah, you could have done exactly that.
So you saved that unit, so in the short term. Anyway, enough of that. I don't know if anybody else came up with anything. Richard, did anything crop up in any of your games that would be worth passing on?
One I'll mention, it's something that people often forget. It's not one that I think is a terrible surprise, but is that you can make MF1 and MF2 combat moves after combat. And people regularly forget that you can do that.
Yes.
So I did it a couple of times at Ice and Fire, and in both occasions my opponent looked surprised that I could do it. So that's my contribution anyway.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think people do forget that. Philip?
Yeah, kind of with both the ones that you've mentioned. I've always struggled to try and get that MF1 and MF2 off. I don't know if I just get my positioning wrong to actually then be able to move round. Because
I find it's useful if you save a card back for recovery of wounds, and then you don't have a wound to recover, but there's a gap caused because of the combat. that's the time when it's particularly useful, because it means you can spend the card then and then hope to draw another card in the subsequent turn.
But at the one that you had, Nick, I actually had that in my game where I think in the order that we kind of were charging, my opponent saw a point where he was going to be able to charge me. But I then decided, I can do a charge now because of the order. I'll put my charge down. And I was going first. So as he had kind of said, I'm going to go in a certain direction, and I was going to go straight past him with my charge. And I whizzed past and hit another unit. And he's going, well, can't I turn to charge after you? And I'm going, well, no, you've already nominated. You're charging to the left, not to the right. So you can't now change your charge to then follow me.
Not to change them. If your unit had done, say, a runaway, that would have been different. He could have changed his direction, but because yours was doing a charge, he can't. And
I did a cheeky charge after he'd nominated his.
Well done, sir.
I'm learning, so that's one up for me.
Yeah, so obviously you knew something I didn't.
So, well, I don't know if I really understood, but I thought, well, I can get past, so let's go for it. And then we worked out afterwards, you can't actually go after me.
Yeah, sounds like. Jamie, anything in any of your games that would worth passing on to the listeners?
I'm not sure anything rules-wise.
Yeah, no.
Constraining charges with skirmishes is always, or constraining people's wheels with skirmishes is always one that's sort of maybe. That you and Matt were talking about is always a.
Yeah, and the point there for anybody who doesn't know, when you declare a charge, it can include a wheel of up to 90 degrees, but any enemy unit will block how far you can charge, even if they're a sug. There's no pushing sugs out of the way or causing them, to allow you to wheel further than you can declare. So
that's with wheeling 90 degrees. I think I caught someone else. I think it was Rob and his Indians caught him out on that one, because I was kind of parallel with him, or whatever it is, he's adjunct to him. And I said, I'm going to do a wheel and a charge. And he goes, well, you can't, because you're turning right round. I said, well, I'm still only doing a 90-degree turn. And by the time I've gone round that 90 degrees, I'm still within reach to reach you.
Yeah.
And he was just, I didn't know you could do that. I'm thinking, well, rules say it's a 90-degree you can do a wheel as part of your charge up to 90 degrees. Yes. Don't think everyone always sees that.
No, it's usually cavalry that can exploit it best for obvious reasons. And the wheel has to be at the start of the charge move.
But bear in mind, it can also be combined with a half base with shift to get past friends. So that is the one occasion where if you get really right with the alignment or just incredibly lucky, you can actually wheel 90, shift halfway, half the base width, and actually hit something that was actually slightly behind you.
I think that's the situation I was in, actually. I think that's what confused him. Because I said, I'm going to wheel round, and because I've got half a base, I'm going to shift over and still hit you. And he's going, that can't happen, can it?
Yeah, that I got caught out with that once. That's nasty.
I'll probably never get it off again, ever. But
and on that devious note, I think we're probably at the point where we need to wrap up this. We've been going a couple of hours, which is one of the longer ones. I will just say for the listeners, the lists we've discussed are going up on the blog. I've also pulled together some figure suggestions for Byzantines for the period, which, because of the amount of time we've taken, not going to cover in this actual talky bit of the podcast, and also some sources on the Byzantines for the period, some introductory books like the Ospreys and a couple of more in-depth stuff. There's 2 or 3 Byzantine military manuals for the period, for instance. But that's up on the blog. Have a look there. and get that information. I think the only other thing I'll say at the moment is we're nearly at the end of January. February, there are 2 competitions that I'm aware of. Beachhead in a couple of weeks' time and BadCon towards the end of February. Both still have places available. Beachhead is in Bournemouth, BadCon is in Burton-on-Trent. And I don't know if anybody else has got anything they think we ought to tell the listeners about at this stage before we sign off. I think that silence suggests no. Anyway, I'd just like to thank, obviously, the whole team. Thank you, Jamie and Philip, for joining us on this one. Maybe we'll have you back sometime, and sounds like probably see you both fairly soon at competitions, maybe with Byzantines. Definitely Philip by the sound of it for Toil later in the year.
Giving away, yep.
Otherwise, say thank you for listening, and we'll hopefully be back again soon.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.